Yes, we can see your screen.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, we can see your screen. Also, there's a chat on this call, so most of the students, they will be dropping their responses on the chat also.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have time at the very end to go ahead and go through that process with you guys. So hold on. Go through the Q&A process with you guys. 1 second. Let me do the presentation mode and then screen share. All right, I think, can you see this presentation slide right now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. All right, I'll get started. So here's the agenda I'll be through today. My name's Ernesto. I'm a product manager. I'll talk a little bit about my product background, some of the products I've managed, some of the companies I've worked at. I'll also talk a little bit about the product development process, what's involved from a product management lens, of course. So I'm not going to be representing the engineering side or any of the other dynamics specifically to the product management focus. I'll go a little bit over the lean framework. I'll also talk about understanding product documentation and go in depth in some of those details. So the first two products that I managed in my career were touchscreen devices in exam rooms that we have across the United States. One was a tablet, as you see here on the bottom right, which allowed people to see educational videos. So if somebody had, diabetes, they could see, videos about diabetes, and recipes and all sorts of information. And then the other one is the one up here where a doctor would press and hold on the screen. They could they pull up a 3D model. They can rotate a heart or any other part of your body, and they can draw on it as part of the conversation that they have with the patient. So I worked in the healthcare space there for about 4 years at this company. And then I moved on to a company called Cooler Screens. It's also another hardware device. This is not a touch screen, but we replaced the glass doors of the cooler aisles of Walgreens with these digital screens, which allow for better promotion, better tracking of the prices, so they don't have to take the stickers off and on. So it's a much more modern way to shop the cooler aisle of Walgreens. I was the product manager that helped them launch from 0 to 50 stores. And then the 50 store launch is what led them to have a 2,500 store expansion. So even though I left in 2019, they're still in the process of installing these cooler screens in the Walgreens stores in the United States across the country in 2,500 stores. And then I also worked at a company called Level X. We were a video games for doctors company. So we made a lot of, as you can see here, this is what a fake knee, this is not a real knee, it looks like real life, but it was actually made in 3D. And we created these experiences so that doctors can practice some of the harder to do experiences in their career. But then we also had like these logic puzzles of like, try to, help the patient out in a certain amount of steps or actions taken, and you get a score at the very end. So, brands like to use this platform as a means to educate the doctors about what kind of products and solutions they have that will, treat their patients. And then I worked at Fetch Rewards. This is a mobile app that lets you scan receipts to get points. And then you use those points to redeem for Amazon or Walmart or Target gift cards. This is a very, very popular app. This is the most popular product I've worked on. It had 15 monthly active users. And I think as of last month, it grew to 15 million monthly active users. So very popular here in the United States. And I worked on the gamification and leaderboard and some of the fun features that were on the application. I worked on that over the last 1.5 years. And now I currently work at BCG. BCG is a Boston Consulting Group. It's one of the top 3 business consulting firms in the world. And as you see here, BCG is also known as the #6 ranked best places to work in 2022 on Glassdoor. And so I've been enjoying my short time here. I just joined BCG, so there's no products or anything I can showcase on this presentation here. But I definitely look forward to showing this, what I worked on sometime in the future, ideally if I have the opportunity to. Okay, so we'll get into the product development process. So at a high level, the easiest way to boil this down is that there's three phases. There's the build, measure, learn. And this framework was made very popular by Eric Ries in the Lean Startup. This is a book that you can purchase online or look up online. There's a lot of people that have done their own version summary of this book. So there's ways that you could find the information from this book to get a hold of what is taught in it. But at a high level, it's the build, measure, learn. So you build, you turn your ideas into products, then you launch it, and then you measure to see how customers respond. And then through that process, you learn about through the process of measuring, you learn whether or not to keep doing what you're doing or you pivot away. The key thing about this process here is that in the past, before this lean process existed, projects would be what was called waterfall, where you just planned out the whole thing end to end. You would say, I'm gonna go ahead and make this mouse, for instance, and then you would, from day one, you would design everything, come up with a whole 100-step plan on how you have to build this, and then you would just get started on it, and you would stick to that plan no matter what. Even if it took you 2-3 years, companies would stick to that original plan and would not change. And that caused a lot of problems. Essentially, other companies that were using this lean startup method were beating them to the punch, because they would build something smart. They would start with, say the bottom part sensor of the trackpad, for instance, and made sure that worked as expected before they built the rest or committed to more resources to work on it. So at a high level, what I'm describing is this build, measure, learn is a means of building small, learning and small increments. And then if you find out you're failing at something, you fail early and you fail fast before you spend even more time and more money and resources on a plan that's not working. And so the goal for this build, measure, learn is to pivot if something goes wrong early enough where you don't kill the business or the company because you're sticking to the original plan. Here's another way to view this build, measure, learn approach. So, step one, you describe a hypothesis, right? There's a set of ideas that you and the team and the company believe could be true for various reasons. You identify the assumptions, right? So assumptions will be made, and that's okay. You don't always have to be right when you're in this, step one, step two phase. You're just collaborating among your team, your company, to identify, what are the best opportunities, and what are the more likely to succeed assumptions that will occur. Then you identify the biggest risks, right? You're a product manager in a business. You are managing the execution of something, and more times than not, it needs to also deliver revenue, and it costs money to build whatever you're trying to accomplish. And so you identify risks, right? Like, what are the things that are likely not to succeed? What are the things likely to be extremely expensive with an unknown rate of success, right? And so the step three is when you start working on that kind of process there. And then you have a plan, a test. So you want to go through the process of prototyping something simple, right? So you want to build a small version. In many cases, if it's like a mobile app or a web app, you can do clickable prototypes that's like the real thing. And you put that into some people that you confide in. You sometimes have power users that are open to see a new design of a feature and give you the feedback without actually having to build it. You just make the mock-up, and then you make it so that they can click through it, almost like a presentation slide. That's one form of doing it. Other times you do have an engineering team, and you can build something in 2 weeks that's crude, simple. It's not robust. It's not the final version, but it can get you a feedback loop from your users about whether or not it's on the right track, right? That's the ideal scenario. You build something small in 2 to 4 weeks, and then you put it out there. It's very close visually to the final thing, but behind the scenes, under the hood, it probably doesn't do anything technical after all. And then you can present that to users or prospective users or prospective customers and see if they like what they're seeing. If they say they don't like seeing or they would never buy it, at least at that point, you only wasted 2 to 4 weeks as opposed to 6 months, right? So this goes back to the build, measure, learn. And here's the, step 6 here is test assumptions. So what I just described right now is the means of testing it, right? If you guys have an assumption as a product management team, and you're like, okay, I think if we implement this feature that does these 4 tasks, I think it'll resonate with the users. I think this is the most important thing. And then you build that 2 to 4 week version of it, and then you find out users never touched it when you launched that small little version to like 100 users. You got to cancel, pivot. That's where you have to do the analyze and rethink, right? So if you analyze and you see, oh, people are not using that feature like I thought, and this is just a bare bones version, I don't want to invest more here. Or maybe you get feedback that will actually tell you what you need to tweak. So maybe the feature is a good idea, but you just need to implement it in a different way. And then that lets you go back to the hypothesis, right? So that's why this is a circle, right? So you come up with the plan, you build it, you deploy it, you test it out, you measure whether or not it's good or bad. And then from those learnings, you decide whether you want to iterate on the existing solution you were working on or pivot onto something different. All right. And here's a cleaner version and something a little more advanced. So what I just described is a very high level, sequence of events. However, here you will see it kind of goes more into the tactical scenarios of what is also involved. I just described very high level each step, but the way to accomplish how you learn is, you do the Socratic method of the 5 whys, or you work with a product owner, or you draw out the customer archetypes. You have semi-autonomous teams that all working on different things, or the build faster process. You might do a continuous integration on the tech side. You might have cloud computing that will help you determine if things are going from code to production fast enough. And then you also have the measure, which is where you might work with a marketing team or an analytics team. You do a funnel analysis, cohort analysis about how the users are engaging, how far into your product experience, from the web screen down to the most advanced feature. At what point are they dropping off, right? Why are they dropping off? And then start doing some of that analysis. So even though I said at a high level at the last slide, I just want to give exposure here that it's not just that easy. There's a lot of different ways that you could do each one of these things. And as a product manager, you are the quarterbacking what needs to be done when. And you are determining with the business of which one of these various different methods of doing these activities is best for the business and the product. And then you're also collaborating with a set of stakeholders, right? So the stakeholders may be experienced in some of these ways of doing some of these steps. They may not be experienced in doing some of these. And so as a product manager, you're feeling that out as well, and you're adjusting to the business and your stakeholders inside of the business to make the product as successful as possible. So what is the Lean framework? So the Lean framework I have here as like a, wait, I think I got the wrong, yeah, I do, okay. So the Lean framework is a way of making sure you do these, small incremental adjustments that I described. So with these small incremental adjustments, you ideally have this process here that you see from end to end, right? So you have a vision. This is where we're talking about the ideas of what to work on. Eventually you commit to something to build. That vision then results in user stories. I'll describe a little bit more about user stories a little bit later. But for now, just understand that the user stories are describing the features to build. And then you have a sprint backlog, where the sprint is something that, like you see here in this wheel, a sprint is usually 2 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks, depends on the company. The one I've always worked with, the time frame I've always worked with is 2 weeks. So when you work sprint with your development team, you have deliverables at the end of those 2 weeks. So you need to make sure that you describe your features and the work in small enough increments where your team can accomplish each of these individual, user stories in a 2 week time frame. That's the ideal scenario. Timing, estimations, and all that varies. You can sometimes be wrong. that's okay. But as long as you're within this 2 to 4 week window for everything that you commit for the team to build on a week to week basis, it's extremely helpful, because then you have like these 24 hours daily stand-ups that are right here in the green arrow. Every day the team meets. Every day, every morning, the team talks to each other and says, what did you work on yesterday? What did you work on today? And what are you working on tomorrow? They know what they're working on tomorrow based on what you have in the backlog, right? So an engineer or a designer, they're building whatever has been assigned as part of the sprint backlog, and then they just take from that backlog, right? So if there's 6 things that they got to build over the next 2 months, you take two things every 2 weeks, right? And eventually you get it done. And so the team is working on a 2 to 4 week cadence. You as a product manager, you will likely be working with a scrum master. That's what this role here is. The scrum master makes sure that everything is assigned to a person on the team, and they keep track of making sure everybody's collaborating properly and that they're still on track. It's more like a project manager type of role. But you as a product manager, you are setting up what for them to do next. You are rarely going to be spending too much time of your time on what they're building right now. You're spending usually about like 60 to 70% of your time about what they need to build next. That's what you're spending your time on, while the team is spending the current week or two on building what you defined already for them to work on. So the product manager is always one step ahead. And then the team is building, as of the latest implementation. And then, when you launch it, that's when you do that feedback loop I described earlier, right? You push it to production, you put it in front of users' hands, and then you find out if it worked or not. And then that goes back to your vision and determining what other user stories to work on. So everything's a cycle. And if you have a good product team or a good business model, the cycle never ends. Like it literally is. There is no end state when you're working in a product that's stable, that has engagement, and that has funding. So think of it this way: Microsoft, built the Xbox. The Xbox has been around for I think over 25 years. It hasn't stopped, right? Just because they launched the Xbox Series X just maybe 3 years ago doesn't mean that they have not already been working the last 3 years on the next one. If you're a product organization, you're always working on the next thing, and then working in these 2 to 4 week chunks is what the Lean framework is about. All right, so I'll move on to product documentation. So product documentation, there's a few different details, steps that are included in what you're supposed to document as a product manager. So first is like vision documentation. So everyone has ideas. You might be working with a CEO. You might be working with a CEO and all of his team, which might be up to like 6, 7 VPs, right? So the inputs, where these ideas are coming from in the vision, might be coming from various different places, and it's not always coming from one. You might have a CEO that says, I have the idea, the buck stops at me, I have the vision. Other CEOs are collaborative, and they say, I have the original idea and I got funding for this small idea, but I rely on my executive team to actually have the whole vision as a team together. So as a product manager, you are going to all of these people in the executive teams, whether CEO, VPs, whatever have you, and you are defining what the vision is. So you have to document that. That can everyone's heads. If you're hired as a product manager and everyone has the vision in their heads, but it's not documented, you have failed as a product manager. You need to document the vision in a way that it will be articulated and accepted and embraced by the whole company. Then you also write a product brief. A product brief is essentially how you're taking that vision and then building it into an actual product. So it's a translation of the ambiguous blue sky idea, and then you're actually taking into a tactical, this is how the product will be satisfying this vision. Then you have user stories. So user stories are, like I mentioned earlier, it's a way of describing each feature that is user facing in a way that can be implemented by an engineer, design team, and your whole team in general. And so there's a particular way of writing those user stories, which I'll go over. And then you also have to have a backlog, right? So you can't just write user stories for this week and then the team is confused about what they're working on next. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're a product manager, you're working on the next 6 months of vision and implementation, and then the team is working on today and what they have to focus on for today. But you as a product manager may need to make sure you have the next 3-4 weeks worth of work already defined, already ready to go for them to build. And that's your job as a product manager. So if you're only writing documentation the day before an engineer gets started, you are failing as a product manager as well. You have to be ahead of the game. You're a strategic role in the company along with an execution role. And the only way you could accomplish both at the same time is that you are a month ahead of your team as far as the documentation they need to do to get the work done. And then you're also available to them if anything goes wrong and if you have to pivot. At the end of that process of having a backlog and these sprints, you now should have a cohesive vision, right? If, like I mentioned earlier, if you're working 1 to 6 months in advance of what to work on for the team, you should be able to sequence that out over the next, 4 to 6 months of how everything's going to be built and the order in which it's ideally going to be built. It's okay if it's not accurate, but you need to have some sort of step-by-step sequence of how the product is accomplishing the vision in a calendar date fashion. And then the last piece is to make mockups, right? Sometimes you need to visually show everyone how something looks like in design before they actually build it. And this is where you collaborate very heavily with designers. And I'll go a little bit into each one of these in these next few slides. I just want to go once over the end-to-end process of the documentation. So how do you just document the vision of a company? I personally like to use a framework that a mentor of mine told me called the OGSM. It's called the Objectives, Goals, Strategies, and Measures. So the objective is the more blue sky, high level thinking. And here I'm gonna be like pretending as if I'm building Fortnite, but I didn't know it was Fortnite, right? I'm gonna pretend I'm a founder and I'm a product manager. I met a founder and he says, I wanna build a game that becomes the world's most popular video game, right? So that's the objective. The objective is something that is not like, it's visionary, it's specific, but it also gives opportunity to be ambitious enough where you can build it in different ways, right? So becoming the world's most popular video game is specific. You want to say you want to be the #1 video game in the market, but at the same time, how you become the world's most popular video game is not defined in your objective. So your objective needs to stay vague, but specific in this manner. Then the next thing is goals, right? So what measurable goals need to be true in order for your objective to be accomplished, right? So in this case, you look at how many daily active users the top video games in the market are doing right now. You look at how much money and revenue the top video game in the market is doing right now. And then you say, okay, if we want to be the most popular video game, we need 100 million daily active users, and we need 720 million in annual revenue. If you don't achieve these two goals, you cannot say your objective has been complete, right? So everything ties together. So you say, I want to be the world's most popular video game. Then you ask, okay, what are some goals that I can set to achieve that? 150 million daily active users and 720 million in annual revenue. Then now you start talking about the strategies, right? How do you accomplish 5 million daily active users? How do you accomplish 720 million in annual revenue? The strategies to achieve this can be endless. And the goal in the product, like I said, the product never ends. The strategy you have you set strategies for a certain amount of time, whether it's for the next month, 6 months, year, quarter, whatever time frame. But you always have to have strategies on how to achieve the goals. You as a product manager don't have to come up with the strategies, but you need to pull all the different strategies, all the ideas of how to accomplish those goals, and you need to document them and then collaborate with your company, with your senior leadership team, whoever have you. You collaborate with them to determine which are the best strategies. Ideally, what you do is you work also with a data analyst that also helps do some of this research, quantify how you should be achieving some of those measurables. So in this case, a strategy for getting 5 million daily active users, you partner with a third-party content creators, right? So you don't just become the sole source of information or content. You may want to partner with another company that's really good at content, and then you bring them in as a partner. Or you have weekly cosmetic items, right? So a lot of these games have ways of changing your outfits, wearing different costumes. And so weekly cosmetic items is a way of getting people to come back and getting more daily active users, right? V-Bucks digital currency, right? Now this is for the revenue. How do you achieve 70 million revenue? You need to have digital currency in the game so that then they can buy gift cards and V-Bucks in retail stores, right? So you could buy it in game, or if you go to Target, you can buy it in retail stores, right? And then another way of achieving both of these is to build, a new battle royale, a new battle royale game type, right? So now you want to get them to come back, and they likely might pay for this other battle royale game type. Actually, I think I made a mistake. There's 2 new game modes is what I needed to put in there. So if you have more game modes, people join the game more often, and then they'll pay more money for those new game modes, right? So the strategies here are accomplishing the goals. The goals are accomplishing the objective, right? And the last piece is the measures. You can't just come up with a plan and say, I think this is going to achieve 5 million daily active users, or I think to achieve 720 million in annual revenue without having a way of measuring it. What you cannot measure, you cannot guarantee success, right? So you have to be able to track the success or failure of your product. Keep in mind, most businesses fail, right? So with that said, you want to be the product manager that when you launch something, within 2 weeks of launching, you see a positive trajectory of, oh, we actually are going to achieve the plan we thought, or you see you're not. And it's okay if you're not. If anything, most people are fail in their, initial launches of any sort of product, right? So if you are failing, find out fast. Do not let the company go 3 to 6 or 12 months on a bad plan. If you find out in the first 2-3 weeks that it's going wrong, you as a product manager need to assess, evaluate, and then determine how to pivot. Now, if it's going successful, then you are the product manager that also identifies why is it so successful. It's good to have this, but then find out why so that you can iterate on that. So ways of measuring here for these strategies and initiatives, right? So, to partner with third-party content creators, maybe the way measured is that you sign and build Marvel downloadable content in Q4, right? With these weekly cosmetic items, maybe you decide you want to have $100 million in revenue from cosmetic items in Q4, right? Or like $1 million in revenue from, I think this is, I accidentally duplicated this. I made this just last night, I apologize. And it's 50 million in revenue from retail V-Buck gift cards in Q4, right? So this achieves the gift card V-Bucks in retail stores strategy. And this is how you measure, right? So a good example here is you launch the V-Buck gift cards in say 50 stores. And then if you find out that only 5% of those sold, there's no way you're going to achieve that 50 million in revenue when you scale, right? So everything needs to tie together. You measure your strategies and initiatives. Your initiatives and strategies are a means of achieving your goals, and your goals achieve your objective. The other way of describing the vision here is a product brief. So given all of these details here, these are high-level one bullet point line items. You should not have a plan. This is a plan right here, right? Whether it's for a quarter, a year, this is a plan that achieves a vision. So you need to document that vision in an actual document, right? So this is would be a Google Doc. We have the product name, what's the purpose, what are the opportunities, what's the target audience for the product, what are some of the competitors, why are they competing against you, list some of the metrics. We already have some metrics here, right? 50 million revenue from retail V-Bucks gift cards in Q4. Those are some of the metrics. What are some of the risks, right? In this case, it could be, Marvel decides not to work with the company, right? That's one of the risks. You as a product manager have to list those things out. What's the pricing of the product? That doesn't always have to be defined by you. You can collaborate with a sales team, a marketing team. In collaboration, you can determine what the pricing is. I did this once before recently. It got very granular in pricing. I just told them how much the product cost to build. And then the sales team determined what was a price point that our customers would achieve. So it was a collaborative effort where I described the cost and then they can determine what's a good price for the client. Then you have user stories, like I mentioned earlier. So user stories are a hierarchy of how to build out this plan, right? So say for instance, so they have 4 different layers. You have the strategy and the initiative, right? It's the actual big thing that you're focusing on. Then you have an epic assigned to that in the actual document. The epic describes the epic is the container of the various user stories. Each user story is the description of a feature. And then the tasks are the actual individual tasks that a designer or engineer or a data analyst has to accomplish. And so the way I broke this down here, I say the strategy is the partner with third-party content creators, right? The epic is build Marvel downloadable content. The user story, or one of the user stories for the epic, is make a Spider-Man skin, right? And then the tasks are you assign them to your team in a project management fashion, right? So this all is rolling up. It's all tied together. And that's what a product manager is hired to do, right? You're not just gathering the best ideas, deciding, and like I know a lot of people on the internet say like the product manager is the CEO of the product manager. Yes, and this is how you're the CEO of the product manager. You're tying the vision to the granular task, but you're making connections in your documentation. Here's how to write a user story. So there is a format to the user story, and that is as a, and then there's a user type, you fill that in. I want to, and then you describe how you take the action, and then you say so that, and then you describe what the value is. How do you, like, it's the accomplishment of the user story. The acceptance criteria is what a lot of the implementers will be relying on. Your QA team, your engineering team, your design team are going to look at your acceptance criteria as a means of telling them what they should be building. And so you have the given, which is like, given the environment, the variables, the various things that can be associated to user story, when the user does something, so you describe the action that the user is doing, and then you describe what should be occurring, right? So given, when, then is a format that allows people to know, okay, what are the inputs that happen before the user takes the action? Okay, when the user takes the action, what happens? And then once that action is done, what happens next, right? That's why it's like a given, when, then. And I do have an example here for the Spider-Man skin that I just described, right? So for the Spider-Man skin, it's as a game player, I want to purchase a Spider-Man theme of my character so that I can fight against my friends in a Spider-Man costume, right? So if you're the Fortnite company and you're trying to accomplish this, you're the product manager assigned to this, Marvel downloadable content, right? We go back to here, and then you decide Spider-Man skin is one of the things you're going to build. This is how I describe it in the actual ticket. Like, this is verbatim. And then the given, when, then is given the user has V-Bucks available to purchase. The V-Bucks system is working and successfully validates transactions. What you're saying here is you have the user has already bought V-Bucks. They already bought digital currency, and the system is up and running and it works, right? The reason you have to put that given is because your QA team won't think about that. The QA team won't think, oh, if the V-Bucks system is broken, then this feature won't work. But you as a product manager know this, and so you put that in the given. The given says if the V-Bucks system is not working, this does not work. And so then the engineering team and QA team and everyone else starts thinking about, okay, how do you avoid that from happening? Then you do the when, right? So it's given, these two things, when the user purchases a Spider-Man costume, 001, right? So you might have one-to-many Spider-Man costumes, but if you do just this one, 001, when the user purchases it, then the costume will be available in the user's inventory, right? So assuming they purchased, the transaction was successful because the system is working, the costume will be available in the user's inventory. The costume is automatically applied to the player character, right? So you buy it, and I am deciding that once you buy it, boom, your character is wearing it. right? And then step 3, the costume will be applied to the character until the player changes it in the costume menu. So here I'm saying the user, we change the costume for the user automatically once they buy it. But by the way, they can change it later, right? All these details are described in this one user story. And so when you hear somebody say a user story, what's the user story? The user story is an actual document that the product manager writes that tells the team what needs to be built in a very, very granular way. So you have all these user stories. There's this is what I gave you, one user story. If you want to achieve this vision of partnering with third-party content creators and then you work with Marvel, it's not just one user story's worth of work. It's dozens, some companies, hundreds, right? So as a product manager, you're spending a lot of time documenting a lot of this stuff and all of this granular detail. And so the backlog is all the features that you're trying to work on. Right here, I have features 1 through 9. And then features 1 through 5 are going to be associated to 5 different releases, right? So feature 1 and feature 2 are going to be in a release. Feature 3 and feature 4 are going to be in a release. Feature 5 is going to be in a release on its own. Each release is going to have one-to-many user stories, right? So here, this is a user story. Your feature 1 and 2 is going to require 3 user stories in one release. Everything is tied together. And so as a product manager, if you're describing everything, you are keeping track of which user stories are associated to which features. And then you're telling the executive team, the team believes we are building these features in this amount of time. And this is what we have in the backlog, right? So when people are asking for more features, whether it's users, whether it's your company, whether it's your clients, whoever it is, you need to keep track of those feature requests because, like I said, the product never dies. The ideal scenario, right? You have funding, you have engagement, you need to keep building the product. And so you need to have a product backlog that has the list of items that you want to build, and then you break them down into features and user stories as a product manager along with your team. The other aspect of documentation is your roadmap. So like I said, if you have this level of detail figured out in documentation, there's nothing stopping you from collaborating with your team and then estimating which timeframes, how long each thing will take. Some things need to be done by design, some things need to be done by engineering, other things need to be done by QA, some things are reliant on you, some things are reliant on a third-party company, in this case, Marvel. Marvel needs to do their things, right? So everything has to be associated to a time frame. And this is what, when people ask for a roadmap, that's what they're asking for. Now, a roadmap can be confused by, oh, it's when a project manager just decides to determine which dates. No, so in product, a roadmap is an estimation of when things will be available. In the world of engineering and product, the dates are not guaranteed. In the process of implementation, your teams are made of humans. And so your engineer might say, oh, this one feature with the criteria that you described, your requirements, you're given then, I think this is gonna take, X amount of time and effort. And then you identify, it's like, oh, roughly around 2 to 3 weeks. And then guess what? Your engineer starts working on it and says, uh-oh, a new detail came up that I didn't think about. And it's gonna take a little bit longer, right? This is okay, as long as it's not changing your whole roadmap, right? Your roadmap in quarters and in months to give you some of that flexibility. That's why you work in sprints, in 2-week sprints, right? You work on a sprint, you have a goal of what you're going to deliver at the end of those 2 weeks. Ideally, you're achieving it 90% of the time. If 10% of the time it doesn't work out, you still work within your roadmap. You're still not that far off, right? And so this is the difference between a product manager and a project manager. A project manager says, oh, that's the date, you got to hit it. Product manager is more like, okay, this is an estimation. This is the ideal set of features. All right, team, let's build. And then if the plan isn't going accordingly, you adjust the plan to make sure you're still hitting your goals and your visions and your strategies. And so that's the difference between a project manager and a product manager. Is everything I described up to this point is done by a product manager, and a project manager is just asking, okay, you're supposed to do the automatic renewal service at the end of June. We're not hitting it. We need to fix it. Like, that's a project manager. Whereas a product manager says, okay, automatic renewal service it's taking longer than we expected, but we're finding out that we need to build 3 additional features, which is going to be extremely valuable for our financial team, right? Let's add that to the roadmap. So that's the way that a product manager thinks versus a project manager. And the last piece here is mockups. So you will be collaborating with a designer before the engineering team starts building. They need a reference point. They need to know how the features should look, how they should behave, how things should animate, how big the icon should be, what kind of visuals are going to be shown, what should be the labels on the buttons. So one of the fun parts for me is I love the design aspect of products along engineering, but I get really close to my designers because we determine how the features will look aesthetically. But then what you'll find out once you get hired as a product manager is you'll show it to the engineering team, and the engineering team is going to be like, whoa, what you're showing looks awesome, but that's going to take 2 years to build. And then you as a product manager mediate between the engineering team and the design team to build the right scope to accomplish your roadmap and your vision and your strategies and your goals, right? So you're the quarterback between those 2 teams to make sure that you don't over-design something that's going to take 2 years to build, and your vision was for it to be done in 6 months, and then your engineering team doesn't scale you back so much where then your design looks like crap and nobody likes the way it looks, right? So you don't want to build something in 1 month, but then it looks so horrible and the performance is so bad that people kind of say, ooh, this app looks like it was made back in 1998, right? So you as a product manager help that gap between design and engineering of over-designing, under-designing, or over-engineering, under-engineering. And that's it. So that's the whole end-to-end process of the product development topic. I showed you some examples of the documentation and just described a little bit about the lean process. So I'll stay on for another 10-15 minutes, and I'll be glad to take on any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Ernesto, for an insightful session. Thank you so much. We really learned a lot. So I think we have 23 people on this call. So please,
okay,
everyone start dropping your questions on the chat. If there's a point in time that along going through the slides, you were not able to understand a part of the slide, or you have questions as regards product development, please drop your questions, everyone. And also, if you understood, please also indicate that you understood. Please do that on the chat. Thank you.
Okay, I think I see a raised hand here. Headers.
Okay, I think you can unmute yourself.
So if you can unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, go ahead. What's the question?
Okay. Yeah, good evening.
Hi.
Okay, so my question is, I think I have maybe quite, okay, as a product manager, you said one of the major work of a project manager is what the team, like you have to have maybe a kind of breakdown of maybe months of the work that they will be doing in the future. So and a scrum master is to probably monitor it on a day-to-day basis, how it's going, just to achieve that. In a case where the plan isn't going the way you thought it should be, does that mean probably you start all over again and quickly reiterate to fix it up and make another plan for maybe months? I think